Guess who? Yep, Ted Pattison here from the Power BI CAT team, and we're on to part 5 of our video series for the AppOwnsData Starter Kit. In the last video, we basically tested the AppOwnsData admin application and got a couple tenants up and running. So in this particular video, we're going to configure both the AppOwnsData Web API and the AppOwnsDataClient, so we can start up the AppOwnsDataClient and test it out. Okay, and so the first step is to go and update the app settings.json file of the AppOwnsData Web API. Now, the Web API is a little bit schizophrenic because it has to deal with both of the Azure AD applications. The client's going to be calling into it, so it has to understand the AppOwnsDataClient app, but also it needs to call, into the Power BI REST API as service principal. So it needs basically the tenant ID, client ID, and client secret, just like the AppOwnsData admin application has. Okay, so let's go ahead and make those changes. Okay, now back to Visual Studio, and we're going to start by going to the AppOwnsData Web API and opening the app settings.json file. Now, we're going to revisit that application that we had before. And so one of the things that you'll see is that we created this client application. That's the client ID that the client application, will authenticate with. This client ID will be in the access tokens, that are sent to this particular client. Okay, now we have to configure the configuration data so we can connect to service principal. Just like we did in AppOwnsData, we can grab this section inside here. In fact, if you're really lazy, you could probably just come back up here and go to the other app settings file, and find, those 3 entries right there. Okay, and now let's go back down here and copy those inside here. Okay, that works great. And then also we have the connection string. So one of the things that we have to make sure is, let's go back to the AppOwnsData admin application. Whatever connection string, we have used here, is the connection string that we want to use, over, inside of the API. And the point is that we want to make sure that both of these applications are looking at the same database instance. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and we'll save, and we'll close this, and we'll close this, and we're ready to move on. Okay, now that we've configured the pieces we need for the AppOwnsData Web API, it's time to configure the AppOwnsDataClient. And one obvious thing we need to add to it is basically making sure it understands the right client ID. But what we're going to see is things are going to be a little bit more complicated, because once I add the correct client ID, I have to then go through the process to recompile the TypeScript, into the JavaScript for output and distribution. And that means that we're going to have to build the project and understand that it's, created using Node.js and Webpack. Okay, so there's only one file that you have to change, which is appsettings.ts. But then what we're going to have to do is understand, how the Node.js integration works. And what you're going to see is that there's certain commands that you have to run. So let's do a demo. I want to just kind of explain a little bit about, how the project was put together. And then you'll basically see, how we're going to rebuild it. Now, the steps to configure AppOwnsDataClient are pretty simple. We're simply going to open up the folder for that project. We're going to find an inner folder named app. And inside of app, we're going to open app settings TS. So this is a TypeScript file. And note that we just need to replace the client ID. So back to our trusty document with our configuration data, we'll grab the client ID for the AppOwnsData client app. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to replace this. Once we have replaced this, we're going to save our changes. And now we can close this file and rebuild the project, and then we'll be ready to go. However, before I rebuild the project, I want to drill down a little bit further. Let's say we go to this particular child project, which is the client. And this has been configured with Node.js and a utility called Webpack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up this folder with Visual Studio Code. And because it has a package.json file, you can see that it must be a Node.js style project. Now, there's going to be a terminal here, and the terminal is going to allow me to run commands inside here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this npm command, which is npm install. Now, obviously, if Node.js is not installed on your computer, all this is going to fail. So let's go ahead and run this right here. And what you're going to see when you run the npm install, it is going to create a folder in your project, which is node underscore modules. And, after this is done, if I go ahead and do a refresh operation, you can see that it has created node modules, and, it's going to create, tons of folders inside here because it's all the Node.js packages that we need during development time. And so we're going to let this run to completion. It's going to take a second. And after this thing runs, okay, now the next thing that we need to do, is we need to take our JavaScript. And, remember that in this project, we have, app.ts, and that has kind of the main JavaScript for the application. There's also, and I didn't mean to say JavaScript, I meant to say TypeScript. So there's TypeScript code in app.ts, but we also have, a structured approach where we have some classes for authenticating, with Azure AD, and also calling into the web API class. But the idea is that the main code is in app.ts. So there is a file called Webpack Config. And if you look at this file right here, it basically says that that app.ts file, is the entry point. And we want to have an output file, which is js.bundle. And so what's really neat about this is that when we run Webpack, it's going to automatically compile app.ts, but it's also going to reach out and find all the other code. So for instance, if I have something such as import star as dollar from jQuery, and now we're importing, all this other, JavaScript, all the JavaScript that I wrote and all the JavaScript that I'm using from third-party libraries, all gets built and basically, added, if I open this up, to this one output file right here. Now, just to kind of see things work behind the scenes, people, well, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak saying I am much more comfortable doing Node.js development in Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio 2019, it's very hard to make things work. So let's say that it's now time for me to build the package. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an npm run build. And once again, that's just build, is the name of a script we added to package.json. But when I run that, I should see Webpack running. And, what we should see, is that it's able to rebuild, what is inside www-root. And, here is this particular file. And just to kind of prove a point, let's go ahead and kind of delete that JS folder. And we'll run this one more time. And what we could see, is that every time we run Webpack, it should, basically generate the file and add it inside here. Now, when I said that Visual Studio 2019 is no good at setting up Node.js projects, however, once you get them set up, it does pretty well at just running them. So with that walkthrough, let's go back here. And what I want you to see is that if I double click on the data client up top here, note that we have, an MS build target here. And after we do a build, it's going to automatically do an npm install. You don't have to have that except for the first time, but I just have it just to be safe. So let's go ahead and close this down. And let's say that, we want to do something, simple inside here, such as let's go to, the beginning of the jQuery document ready. And we'll do something, such as, console.log. And then, what all American athletes do is they say, hi, mom. So now we've added this inside here. Let's go ahead and save. And so what I want you to see here is that as I come down here and we rebuild the client, we should be able to kind of look in the output window and, basically see evidence that the process, has gone through and has triggered Webpack, and any changes, that I've made, into my underlying TypeScript code, should have been recompiled, and once again, all the output goes here into www.root.js bundle.js. Okay. And if you were going to move, from what I have simple jQuery, to an Angular or to a React.js style project, this could remain exactly the same. Okay, back to the slides for a second. One of the things that I showed you is the background of, how the AppOwnsDataClient project is built with Node.js and Webpack. Now, ultimately, as long as Node.js is installed on your machine, you can just basically right-click the AppOwnsDataClient project and choose Rebuild, and it's automatically going to make sure npm install has run, and that you have all the local packages, and that npm run build executes the Webpack and rebuilds your TypeScript, into the JavaScript bundle.js output file. Now, once you rebuild, once again, everything recompiles, which gives you the luxury of opening up app.ts or any of the other TypeScript files, making changes, and then basically rebuilding the project, to make sure your TypeScript code, runs appropriately. Okay, and now that we've seen that, it's time to go ahead and test the client application. We've configured the web API, we've configured the client. Now, testing the client, it's very helpful to also be running the AppOwnsData admin application. So the idea is that we're going to log on as a user in the client application, and we'll have no permissions at first. And then we'll keep going back to the admin application and giving that user, incrementally more permissions, for each test. So let's go ahead and test this out. Okay, the last time we tested, we had AppOwnsData admin as a startup application, but that's not going to work now because we need multiple startup projects. So I'm going to right click not on a project, but on the top level solution and choose properties. And now what I'm able to do is I'm able to take the AppOwnsData web API and, have that be a startup project, and have AppOwnsData admin and AppOwnsDataClient all be startup projects. Let's go ahead and choose OK. One other thing to note is that if I go into AppOwnsData web API, and we go into properties, and launch settings, notice that you can do things, such as, what is the port number that we are going to be using, and do we want to automatically launch in browser, true or false? So here we'll say launch in browser equals false. Okay. And let's go ahead and start this up. And so, as we start, what we should see, is that we have one browser session, running 44300, so that is the URL we've used for the admin app inside here. And likewise, here is the one, for the client application. Okay, let's kind of get them side by side. Maybe first thing we'll do is we'll sign into the client application, and we'll go ahead and we'll look at the users table, and the users table is completely empty. Okay, so now let's go through the experience of logging in. Okay, so we'll log in, and as we log in here, it might automatically log in for a user session. So it seems like it knows who my user is. So we've logged in, and note that I've made it so you can hover over here. Now let's go ahead and log out, and now let's log in as a different user. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to log in with a Microsoft personal account. It's not even an org account. ted@tedpattison.net. And so this time we're going to go ahead and log in, and just to prove you can, let's log in as a personal account. And so as I do that, let me go ahead and log in here. Now, the first time any user logs in, they're going to see this. And the idea here is that we have permissions that we're giving away, and there's my app. And one of the things that I didn't do earlier is I didn't put very good descriptions, but this is the reports embed permission. So we're going to go ahead and say OK. And so now what happens is the user logs in, but the user, doesn't get anything back. Now, what we're going to do here is, let's say that, we bring up, once again, our good friend Fiddler. And, with Fiddler over here, and I'm going to go back to filters and make sure that I'm not using filter here so we can see, different things. If I did use filter, maybe we should put local host in there as well. Okay, let's go ahead and run the filter set. But now as we go ahead and we run this again, what I want to do is let's go back here, and you can kind of see that the first thing that happened is that there was this call to the user login. So there was an API call from the client after the login. And then secondly, there's work to get the embed token. But because the user was unassigned, we don't return anything. You can see it's a tenant, is blank. And that's basically why the client side is kind of giving this experience. Okay, now let's go back here and let's do a quick refresh. And what we should see is that, 2 users, have been added. So here's the user I'm running as. So now as I play the administrator, I'm going to click on edit. And now let's take that user, and let's assign that user at first to wingtip. And now that I've assigned that user to wingtip, let's go back here and let's refresh the user's view. And so now what the client application does is it brings back this view model that tells it, what is the tenant wingtip, and there's the sales report inside there. Now, let's say that I go back over here and, maybe I made a mistake and I put the user in the wrong tenant. But what we're showing here is that I can easily reassign this user. And now let's go refresh. So it's very easy for me to take the user and point that user to any tenant that I see fit. Great. Okay, let's keep going back and doing a couple more things. So let's go back and let's assign this user to wingtip. But this time, let's go ahead and add edit permissions. So we'll go ahead and we'll add edit permissions. You can kind of see that can edit equals true. So let's see how that affects the user experience. So now what we've done is we've given the user the ability to, toggle into edit mode, to do something such as customize a report. This guy hates column charts, loves bar charts. Let's go ahead and maybe one more cosmetic change is we'll go ahead and change the color inside there to a much better color. Let's go ahead and save that change. Okay, now note that if you give a user edit, we're going to give them the ability to save changes to an existing report, but there's no save as command. So now let's go through and see, what happens if I come back here. And now in addition to can edit, the user will also have the can create permissions. So now that we've done that, let's go back here and look at the user experience. And so what we'll see here is that not only can the user take a report, into edit mode, but that user can also come down here and do a save as. So let's do a save as. And so maybe we'll have, California sales, and now note that we can kind of go back and forth, between these 2 reports. And since this is the new one, California sales, let's go ahead and open that, inside of edit mode. And then maybe we'll go to the filters panel. And so I'll go take state and we'll quickly, create a California filtering scheme. And now we'll go ahead and, do a save operation. And so, now what you can see is, we've built something where users can add their own content and start creating new reports, customizing existing reports. One more thing I want to show is that for users that have can create, there's a create report section that lists all the data sets. So if I click on a data set, what I'm able to do, is to kind of quickly, create a new report. So if I do something quick and dirty here, we'll add states, as a particular filter mechanism. And maybe I'll go here and we'll, quickly take this and turn this, into a good looking visual. And now let's put this up top here. And now we'll go ahead and we'll add a map, and we'll look at sales revenue by city. Yeah, and now, I've quickly created this new report, and maybe just to make it really pretty, we'll get rid of the title. We'll add a border. And so now I've done, all this work, to create this good looking report, and we'll go ahead and do a save as, and now we'll have kind of the, select state, and we'll go ahead and forgive my spelling here, but now we have 3 different reports. One was created as a new report, one was copied from an existing report, and one was the original report that we've customized. Now, one more feature I want to point out here is, let's take our browser window and let's go ahead and test the breakpoint. So if I go, into sales right here, and now we get smaller and smaller, eventually we kind of hit that breakpoint, and we go, into that, mode where there I am, and there's, the individual reports inside there. Okay, so once again, just wanted to do a complete step through of, how we are able to configure user permissions, from the admin application, and then what's the, user experience, as I gradually increase the permissions that users have. Okay, so you've just seen me do a complete walkthrough of testing the different types of user permission assignments. So beginning testing when the user is unassigned, what view do they get? Once you've assigned a user to a tenant with read-only permissions, and going through also the permutations of adding edit permissions and then giving edit plus create permissions. Now, once we've got our permissions together, we can come up with different ways to present the user with the experience. And you've kind of seen what happens, when a user is unassigned, versus what happens when a user has read-only permissions on the tenant. And we also kind of saw that as long as you design your reports with a mobile view, you can basically give a responsive approach to your design as well. Okay. And then we kind of saw that, as you, give more permissions to edit and then edit plus content create, you've given the user the ability, to basically customize things. And you kind of also saw that the way the application is written, whenever any user does anything, they're just either customizing or adding content to their own tenant. Never will, a user be able to affect anybody else's tenant. And once again, the authorization layer that we've built in, is what enforces that set of rules. Okay. And once again, you kind of saw that once you add edit plus create, you can call save as, or you can create a new report and then call save as. But there are 2 things. There's copy report from an existing report, and there's also create report, when you're creating a report from a data set, but no existing report layout. Okay, yes, I know you're a developer, so let me finish off by showing a couple little tricks here. First of all, let's look at the developer tools in the console. So if now we go to more tools, and now we go to developer tools or Control-Shift-I, I can get to the console window here. Now let's go ahead and refresh. And there's that hi mom statement that I put in. So remember, I just wanted to test kind of updating the TypeScript and rebuilding the project to show you that would show up. But here you can kind of also see that the application code does a lot of console.logs. So anytime we process the user login, or we view the view model, or we log a custom event, you can basically see that in the browser, if that is your cup of tea. Likewise, let's go back here. And if I take this and, now one more time, let me, do a refresh inside here. And, once again, from this side, what we can see, is, here's the user login API. Here is the embed API, where there's really nothing being sent to the web API, but the big deal is what is the web API, returning back, to the caller inside here. And then also when we log an activity, and this is what we're going to talk about in the next section, you can see that the client just makes a web API call. Okay, let's do one more interesting thing. And the last interesting thing we'll do is, this application's running. So let's go to the web API And let's go in the Web API into controllers, and let's go into the embed controller. And in the embed controller, the idea is that there's going to be a call from the client that's going to route through here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go back to the client, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a refresh. And that ends up in the client making a call inside here. And so the first thing that I want you to see, is let me do a single step through here, and we know who the user is. And ultimately, the way things are built, inside of the client, inside the Web API, if I go back to the startup program, you can see that, it does things like hooks into the database. Also, it says, add Microsoft Identity Web App Authentication. So this is what we do so that the app can authenticate a service principal. Okay, but also down here, we have services, Microsoft Identity Web API Authentication. So here's the case, where it's able to look, inside app.json, and pull out the GUID so it knows what client. And then if I come back here, one more thing I want to show you up top here is that we have to authorize. And here we're checking to make sure that there is an access token that has the delegated permission that we created earlier, which is reports.embed. Okay, so ultimately, before we hit any of our code that's going to do the work to create the embed token, we're able to figure out who the user is. Okay, now we'll continue on. And so what we'll now do is we'll start moving through, this code right here. And the first thing we do is get the current user from the database. We get the current user, and, what do we know about that particular user? And if that particular user has a tenant, we're going to continue running. If not, we'll just return an empty view model. Now, before we call Power BI, let's get information, from the database. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to make a call. And so now we know what the current tenant is. And in particular, we know what the workspace ID is. And once again, we didn't have to call to Power BI to figure that out. It's just a quick way to kind of pull that data out of your local database. Okay, now we'll create an embed token. And so now we're going to go through this process of figuring out, what are the data sets, and so here I'm actually calling, into the, Power BI REST API, and we see there's, one data set that's inside there. And so we're able to kind of step through here. And once I find the data sets, same thing with reports. Okay, here, we saw there's one data set. When we look at reports, we see that there's 3 reports like we'd expect. But what we're doing, inside this code is now kind of to collect the information about the reports and the data sets. And so now is when we're going to build the embed token. And the idea is that when we build the embed token, there's a special set of objects. Generate token request v2 dataset. So here, let's kind of run through this a little bit quicker now. We basically build this set of objects, with the reports, with the workspaces in question. And so ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to call PBI client embed, and we're going to generate token. So this gets the embed token. But what we want to do is we want to pass an object that has, in our case, something for one data set, and, multiple reports. And, for each report, do we want to allow editing? Yes or no? Okay. And now we're able to kind of pass this back, and let's just go ahead and choose OK. And so we've got the embed token back. But once again, I kind of wanted to step through so you can kind of see the code path, where the API is able to figure out who the user is and to basically get back, the resources and generate the embed token, correctly for that particular user. Okay, now we're at the end of part 5. And so on to the very last part 6 video. And so what we're going to look at in the next lecture is, now that we've got the client application running and it's generating, all these custom events. So we're collecting telemetry information. We're going to finally look at how to use the activity logs that we're generating to monitor user activity, and also to monitor and report on the performance that our reports, are loading and rendering.